It's Pospo and BRAINCAST. No surprises there, right? I mean, what else could you be doing on a Monday at 1 p.m.? I know many things, but let's just assume this is the only thing in your life. Not bad, right? I mean, last week we had Professor David Nutt take us on a psychedelic journey through the fields of psilocybin and show us how we may start repurposing illegal substances to improve our mental health, but also suggesting that politicians should be brutalized before taking big decisions. And to be honest, looking at the Brexit shambles around me, I couldn't agree more on that. But let's see who we have for you today. 2013 NARSA Young Investigator Award, 2016 King's Prize Fellowship, Wellcome Trust and Royal Society Sir Henry Daly Fellowship, Fellow and Board Member of the Young Academy of Europe, not bad at all, I should say. BRAINCAST people, this is Dr. Gemma Modinos. Gemma, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Pospo. I was very excited about this and been looking forward to it for weeks now. Thank you.
So let's get something straight before we start getting nerdy. So what are emotions and how are they different from feelings?
Right, so people have written books about this, right, Pospo? So this could take us, and different disciplines have different views, but I can give you a shorter answer to the way that we look at these concepts. And so when we talk about emotion, we talk about different states such as happiness or sadness, of anger or fear or surprise. And these are inner states of experience that have a behavioral correlate, so that you can measure. So a facial expression or a tone of voice or even a change in heart rate or breathing rate, respiration. Whereas feelings refer to your subjective experience of this. So how it feels for you. And, I can't tell how you feel, but I can tell with more accuracy what emotion you may be having. And, as a scientist, I'm interested in things that I can measure. So we focus on emotion.
Amazing. So, I mean, it's really interesting that, even nowadays, when people talk about, emotions or feelings, because the truth is that, we tend to use them interchangeably, or even, when you gesture to reveal, how you feel about something, you tend to point to your heart. I mean, I can't remember the last time someone said, I love you and touched their head, though I'm thinking about it now, love can be a real headache, but joking aside, we do now know that emotions are located in the brain. Can you tell me what exactly?
Yes, so what we do know is that it's not just one brain region involved in emotions, right? But there are networks that predominantly are involved in emotion as opposed to more cognitive processes like verbal fluency or working memory. And studies with brain imaging, while people, are in an MRI scanner and they are asked to, or they are induced a certain type of emotion with pictures or with videos or with sounds, it does engage a network of regions that we call the cortical limbic system. And within this network, there's also different hubs that tend to, respond more to certain emotions than to others. And it's not only about the hubs, but also the way they interact with each other. So it also changes depending on whether you are just determining the emotional significance of something, whether you are identifying that and appraising what emotion that is, or whether you're trying to downregulate it, your emotional response. So this can be, for example, the amygdala determining threat and leading to a fear response, or the anterior insula determining disgust. But these areas also interact again with brain regions that are involved in, increasing your physiological responding, such as say increasing your heart rate, preparing you to fight or flight. And what's important as well is that these more limbic emotional responding areas also interact with prefrontal areas of the prefrontal cortex, more involved in assigning what meaning that has and how to respond to it. So orchestrating a response, appraising whether it is actually a threat when you see a bit of smoke in the kitchen and you need to get the hell out, or it's actually the toaster, but it's fine.
That's really common in my kitchen, I have to say.
It happens often. Yes, this bottom-up and top-down dialogue is really important for survival within this cortical limbic circuitry.
Wow, I mean, that sounds like really, really complex. But you know, talking about emotions, you know, it's really hard to talk about them without mentioning, you know, the Bowlby-Ainsworth attachment theory. I think it would be a terrible omission. But you know, there is certainly evidence to how early relationships affect brain development. So, how do you think, you know, adverse experiences in childhood affect our emotions as adults?
Mm. Yeah, so the roots of who we are as adults go back to our experiences as a child, right? So how we think, how we behave, how we interact with other people is influenced by our early years. And in fact, there's a brilliant book by my dear friend, clinical psychologist, Dr. Lucy Maddox, called Blueprint: How Our Childhood Makes Us Who We Are, that I recommend because it explains, you know, in a very sort of informed and educated, but also compassionate way, how our experiences through development inform who we are. In terms of adverse experiences in childhood, there's evidence that they are associated with greater emotional difficulties as adults, as well as, you know, a higher likelihood of developing a poorer mental health outcome. And for example, in the case of schizophrenia, one of the largest risk factors is psychosocial stress. And what that means, psychosocial stress, is stress to do with other people, right? It means childhood trauma, migration, social deprivation. So, of course, two people go into these experiences with a different genetic makeup. So that also has something to contribute. But at the moment, there's little we can do about the genes yet. So acting on adverse experiences in childhood, then it requires, you know, acting on social policy. And that's also a much wider conversation. What we do in my lab, we follow a strong model that shows that stress during particularly important developmental stages, such as puberty, can lead to the development of psychosis-like features at adulthood, such as, you know, increased subcortical dopaminergic function, which is a characteristic in psychosis. And this is shown in experimental animals. So the animals that will show this adult psychosis-like phenotype tend to be more anxious during puberty already. And in humans, we do see that one of the most common characteristics before the development of a psychotic outbreak is a state of increased emotionality and anxiety. What is striking for us as well is that the animal research has shown that treating this anxiety early, downregulating it, can block the development of the psychosis-like phenotypes and pathology at adulthood. And they have done this with drugs that target the GABAergic system, the main inhibitory neurotransmitter in brain. But drugs may not be the only way, of course, but you know, it's difficult to give CBT to a rat. So we're very much interested in translating this model to humans to see if we can identify a way to target higher emotionality early, to see if it can have an effect in preventing or delaying the onset of psychotic symptoms at adulthood.
I mean, you know, I'm really happy you mentioned now you brought psychosis in the game, because I want to talk a bit about that, you know, because it's not enough to only be aware of your emotions, but also be able to regulate them, right? I mean, in the now classic model proposed by Gross in the 90s, there are two primary emotion regulation strategies that are pretty self-explanatory. So reappraisal and suppression. And while reappraisal has been linked to enhanced social functioning and higher quality of life, suppression tends to do the opposite. I know I'm oversimplifying, but so a 2019 meta-analysis, though, by Ludwig on the Clinical Psychology Review, he concluded that emotional regulation is markedly impaired in people with psychosis. Can you make it a bit clearer for me?
Yeah, so the distinction between these different aspects of emotion is interesting, because, you know, emotional processing involves the emotional experience, but also the expression and the regulation of the emotion. And indeed, studies of emotion regulation in psychosis, and also in people at risk of psychosis, tend to show that there's this increased responsivity to stimuli that would otherwise be considered neutral, so non-emotional. So, you know, this responsivity to neutral stimuli is not only observed, you know, in terms of brain activation, but it also in studies looking at physiological measures like skin conductance. And we could think of this as more subcortical kind of limbic hyperresponsivity, but if the coupling between these regions and brain regions involved in regulating affect is compromised or disturbed, and there is evidence that connectivity between the medial prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus amygdala complex is compromised, then there's evidence that these regions, these limbic regions, may run unchecked, and so you can be attributing emotional salience to stimuli that's otherwise non-salient, and by the same time is more difficult to downregulate them. So the tendency to perceive neutral stimuli or situations as more emotionally arousing has been associated with positive symptoms of psychosis. So, for example, delusions. If you tend to think that the faces around you are having a negative meaning. And what we are very interested in is in understanding the neurochemical mechanisms of this. So, if we can try and find a way to regulate this hyperresponsivity to make a difference for people. And again, it doesn't need to be with the drug.
Amazing, because what you're in fact saying is that there is a link between emotions and the development of psychotic symptoms through maybe, as you said, the emotional salience. Amazing. Which actually brings us to February this year. So just before the lockdown knocked our doors. Okay, I don't even think about this happening ever again. So you published a paper, though, on Gemma psychiatry, where you attempted to see if there is any association between psychosis and poor emotional processing. So can you tell me what you did there?
Yeah, so this was a study that was part of a big international consortium that the primary aim is to look at gene-environment interactions in the development of schizophrenia. It's called EUGEI. And what we did was we used brain scans from 265 people that had been acquired at 9 different international sites. And participants, they also completed a computer-based task that asked them to recognize emotions in faces, happiness, anger, And of these 265, 213 are people at clinical high risk of psychosis. What this means is people who experience some attenuated symptoms of psychosis, but not frequent or severe enough or distressing enough to comply with the diagnosis of full-blown psychosis. And so we did this at baseline, the scan and the computer task of emotion processing. And then we followed people up clinically for up to 2 years to determine 2 types of outcomes. Functional outcome, so how you function in society, your job, your relationships, and then transition to a psychotic disorder. Okay. And what we found was that poorer functional outcomes at follow-up were associated with abnormalities at baseline in the recognition of fear, in that the association between the recognition of fear and anger with gray matter volume in the hippocampus and the medial prefrontal cortex were also associated with poorer outcomes. We did not find anything to do with transition to psychosis in these 2 variables, emotion processing or in no. So of course, transition to psychosis is a major outcome, has been, but about 20% of people at clinical high risk will develop psychosis.
Yeah.
Whereas, a larger proportion of people will still have a poor functional outcome despite not transitioning. So functional outcome is also an important outcome, and we were able to link it.
Amazing. Now, what I'm also interested, though, is that you finish the abstracts of that same paper with a phrase that interventions that target socio-emotional processing may improve functional outcomes. So are you suggesting that there are any implications from this paper for treatment?
Yeah, so of course this was like one paper and it needs to be replicated in an independent sample. But what we can tell is that, if we observe this association between your baseline emotional processing abilities and developing a poorer outcome, then a first application could be for clinicians, to be able to stratify when the clinical high-risk individual comes to the clinic based on their emotion recognition abilities, who's more likely to have a poorer outcome. And the second implication is that, it might be suitable, this is not probably how every single person develops psychosis. This is probably, could be one way that a proportion of individuals do. But, another potential implication is that targeting this emotion processing with, psychotherapy could be a way to prevent the development of these poorer outcomes.
I mean, similarly, one of the aims of your lab is, can we modulate emotional brain circuits to design new disease-modifying drugs? So how would a disease-modifying drug look like in psychosis? What do you think?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, that study is a structural MRI study. So, with a structural MRI study, it's very difficult to really inform what neurochemistry is involved in terms of developing new targets. So, for psychosis, as you know, we currently have antipsychotics, which mainly act on the dopaminergic system by blocking D2 receptors. And they do work very well for some symptoms and in many patients. So, if people are prescribed antipsychotics, it's good to take them. But there's quite a large proportion of patients that do not respond to D2 blockers. And these drugs do not do much for other symptoms of schizophrenia, like cognitive deficits or socio-emotional deficits. And in people at clinical high risk, studies have not shown that they have any efficacy in preventing transition to psychosis either. So what's also striking is that there's evidence that suggests that actually the dopamine abnormality is not the primary abnormality in psychosis. The dopaminergic system is being dysregulated by upstream regions that, like the hippocampus, that regulate subcortical dopamine function. So, there's substantial evidence from preclinical studies and also from human studies that the hippocampus is overactive in schizophrenia. And a very influential theory proposes that this is due to a deficit in GABA, which can be linked to increased stress during development. Yes. Animal studies have also shown that enhancing GABA premorbidly can reduce the increased anxiety stage, as I mentioned earlier, and prevent this dopaminergic abnormality and associated psychotic-like behaviors from happening. So, GABA in the hippocampus is also involved in emotional, and the hippocampus are also involved in emotional responding and in cognition. So a drug that would increase, GABA function in the hippocampus amygdala complex more targeted than diazepam, for example, could reduce anxiety in a more targeted way and work towards the prevention of the development of psychosis, while also touching on other symptoms that currently are untreated. So that would be my dream therapy, really.
Dream therapy, I love it. So another area that you are interested is schizotypi. So for people not familiar with the word, can you please explain what is schizotypi, but also why is it important in our attempt to understand better what psychosis is?
So schizotypy refers to the expression of psychotic-like experiences in the general population, and it can be measured with well-validated self-report questionnaires like the OLIFE or the SPQ or the CAVE, and it's based on the idea of a continuum of psychosis, by which there's no categorical division between psychosis and normality, if we want to call it that, but it's a matter of degree of the severity of the experience and the distress associated with it. So these are healthy individuals that self-report these psychotic-like experiences. And it's important, or it can help in understanding psychosis, because it allows you to study, for example, the neural correlates of these experiences without, confounding factors like medication, antipsychotics, or illness chronicity, or comorbidities with other disorders, and also inform mechanisms of resilience, because then again, they are healthy.
So we talked about dysfunctional emotional processing. We talked about how adverse experiences in childhood, like bullying, discrimination, and other pleasant stuff, can increase the risk of developing psychosis, suggesting that social adversity and exclusion predisposes someone to developing psychosis. And actually, I remember an amazing paper in Science back in 2013 by Mina and Eva, so that they showed how social exclusion in mice, adolescent mice, with low genetic predisposition may actually lead to abnormal behaviors. Since eradicating adversity from the world and society in general would be impossible. So what is it, in your opinion, the single most important factor that makes a person more resilient to developing psychosis?
Yeah, so the single more is difficult.
I know.
I think, yeah, it's difficult. Of course, you know, as I said, we can have better genes going into things through life, but seeing, you know, schizophrenia seems to be about genes of small effect, and the environment has a very large contribution. I'm sorry, but I do think that the lower the social disadvantage, the more, you know, one resilient is when confronted with stress, and this probably is a very important role. So, you know, lower levels of psychosocial stress, I think they are a massive factor for resilience, and this has a lot to say about social politics and how our societies are structured, how governments deal with inequalities and social disadvantage, and what strategies are in place to mitigate those. You know, the fact that there is a factor that makes someone resilient doesn't mean that there's nothing we can do. Of course, you know, it's good to try and not to smoke a lot of cannabis and stuff like that. But I do think that it's important that this evidence reaches higher up and people start making decisions based on.
This is Gemma, because you did it. You mentioned politics. You brought in politics in this game. So you studied in Barcelona, you did your PhD in the Netherlands, and your postdoc in the UK, which certainly allows for some sort of, you know, flexibility, not only in navigating the different cultures, but also overcoming, you know, bureaucratic obstacles. So how do you think Brexit, you brought the politics in, how do you think Brexit is going to affect research and academics based here in the UK?
Yeah, so badly. Brexit is, but the thing is that it's already affecting negatively researchers and academics in the UK. You know, this period of uncertainty since 2016 has already had tangible effects, and Brexit, you know, hasn't even happened. There's been fewer applicants from EU countries to come into university degrees here. People are being discouraged from having a prominent role in EU-funded schemes already. And as you said, science is about collaboration, is about mobility and free exchange. So for you to be able to develop your own research vision and how you want to take things forward, it's often very, you know, beneficial if you've traveled and you've experienced being a researcher in different countries. You have these established networks, and all of this is under threat now with Brexit, and especially with a hard Brexit. So I know that it's still undecided during the transition period, but what I hear is quite likely that the UK will end up being a third country for EU funding mechanisms instead of an associated country. So that will mean unless you apply for something to move to the European research area, you can't hold it. And that's not only bad for people here. That's, you know, the European Commission has been giving a lot of research money to a great deal of the available funds have commonly been allocated to UK-based scientists. So, and that obviously there's talent. So that's, you know, both parties are missing something here. And I think, you know, they need to come up. They need to make sure that both parties come up with a really good solution, and hopefully we can still participate in Horizon 2020 and that science can still prosper.
Let's hope. Let's hope. So last year, you received the Schizophrenia International Research Society Rising Star Award. I mean, not surprised at all about that, but you were the first female to ever receive this. So 2019, and you were the first female. So are things that bad in academia when it comes to the notorious gender inequality?
Yeah, so there is a gender gap in academia. It's not the only gap, but there is a gender gap, and you know, women are still underrepresented, And the gender gap is particularly evident at senior academic roles. So, and of course, the situation is even worse for women of color, for example. And there's been people who have been quantifying this. So research from Harvard Business School showed that a man working in the same academic field as a woman with similar or even identical credentials and family circumstances, so accounting for family circumstances, is more likely to have a higher academic rank, with the only factor influencing the different academic rank being gender. And
wow.
and the gender gap has also been quantified in Europe, showing that women are a minority among senior academics, and they hold fewer positions in academic leadership, so like rector and stuff. And in the UK higher education system, while of all academics, 45% are female, only a quarter of females are in full professorships. So and as it has been shown that childcare alone cannot explain why women do not get promoted, it suggested that real barriers have to do with institutional biases, individual biases, attitudes of managers, and self-limiting beliefs of women, which together can create what's called a sticky floor rather than a glass ceiling. So things have improved, but there's still a long way to go.
It sounds bad. It sounds bad. Now, you recently published a letter in Nature alongside Aaron Husby. So it was named COVID-19 Research After the Pandemic. So how has the pandemic affected the researchers around the world? But most importantly, what I'm more interested in is, did you feel supported?
Yeah, so this morning I just spoke at a press conference organized by Initiative for Science in Europe, as my role as vice chair of the Young Academy of Europe. We are a bottom-up initiative. We have over 150 members who are young scholars across Europe with outspoken views about science and science policy. And this is at the level of people like me, so young PIs who run their own lab, but for a few years only. And we have been running a survey since June on the impact of the pandemic on young scholars, just to be able to have some data on it rather than rumors. And it's important to note that while people at my career stage, and I do consider myself privileged in many ways, even when you have your own Sir Henry Dale Fellowship or an ERC starting grant, even when leading your own research group, like myself, or we're still in temporary positions, as am I. And then the research shutdowns due to the pandemic, and which mean we can't access the buildings where we, in my case, do the brain scans and get the blood, but also we can't access the research participants. Our careers are on hold at the moment, and this adds an incredible amount of stress at an already stressful career stage. And it's clear from the pandemic that the early career researchers, PhD students, postdocs, young PIs, they will take the worst hit. So what we did with our letter and this morning is call for funders and institutions to have a bit more clarity on costed extensions on a case-by-case basis, because our survey is showing that what the pandemic is doing is exacerbating inequalities in academia. And again, women and people with caring responsibilities are the worst affected. So that this is, that costed extensions are warranted because people need to be able to finish their funded research. And what's important is that, if you put at risk the progress of early career researchers, then this goes beyond the individuals, because, these are the future of the research landscape. So then it has a wider implication in science and society.
Okay, enough with the doom and gloom. Enough with the doom and gloom, Gemma. Thank you so much. Before we finish, there is, so first of all, Daniel Thompson says, doing these emotion studies in an MRI scanner at IUPPN is fun, so well done for that. And then there is Yoram that is asking if you please repeat the book title by the clinical psychologist that we mentioned a bit earlier.
Yes, so the title is, so her name is Dr. Lucy Maddox, and the book is Blueprint, How Our Childhood Makes Us Who We Are.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Gemma, for today. Gemma Modinos, BRAINCAST people. Next Monday, join me as we enter the I want you to be quiet as we enter the magical world of sleep. No, we're not going to an online sleeping session, although to be honest, that's not that bad an idea. Instead, we're joined by one of the world experts in sleep. You may know him from BBC, Radio 4 or Channel 4, but now you can see him on BRAINCAST, the author of the fascinating book, The Secret World of Sleep, Dr. Guy Lessiner. And on that note, Pospo and BRAINCAST for Mostly Learning. Over and out.
Hi, thank you.